This is where things change quite a bit depending on how long my trip is. Improperly rigging your inflatable fishing kayak for the river will leave you tangled in trees, losing gear, losing fish, and fully frustrated after your float. However, it doesn't have to be this way. This is how I turn this deflated piece of plastic into a river fishing machine. So let's head to the water and show you what I mean. I'll be the first to admit that I love rigging kayaks. So I tend to over-rig kayaks. And when I first started, I wanted to cram everything onto my kayak. If I maybe needed it, it was coming on the kayak. Even though I'd never used it before, but oh well, they might be biting this, or I might need my power pole, or I might need my trolling motor, and it made for very uncomfortable, cumbersome fishing. However, by the time I started rigging this iA.T.A.K 110, I'd learned to keep it simple. Let's walk through my river fishing setup. Now, first of all, I always have a PFD. When I'm fishing alone, it's always on, never comes off, even if the river's not flowing at all. Now, I consider myself a pretty strong swimmer, but I've swam some currents. As a matter of fact, I was in currents yesterday on the river that there was no way I could swim against them, and they just carried me down the river, and there wasn't a lot I could do. So I always recommend wearing your life jacket no matter what. All right, with that disclaimer out of the way, we'll start at the front. You can see the iA.T.A.K has this metal bar where you can attach all kinds of stuff. It could be a fish finder, it could be whatever. But for the river, I like to keep it really simple. I'll either stick my phone here, or I'll stick a cup holder here to catch all my lures, hold a drink, whatever the case may be. Next, I've got the option to have footrest or no footrest. I always go with them. It's just way more comfortable. I've got another spot here. Mom likes to put a rod holder right here, and I'm just not a fan of it because it still gets in the way of my paddle a little bit. So once again, I'll either put another cup holder here or just leave it blank. One thing I love about the iA.T.A.K is the seat. It is super comfortable. However, I do have a kayak cushion that I use on every single kayak seat just because it makes it that much more comfortable. I never go fishing without it. All right, there we go. I got my life jacket and I've got my kayak cushion in there. Now this spare rod holder is angled backwards, and it's actually angled a little bit too high most of the time. I know this creek's pretty wide open, not a lot of overhanging trees, so it'll be fine for today. But typically if I'm fishing a narrow river or a small creek with lots of overhanging trees, I'm gonna angle this even further down and back. That way it's just not catching on anything. Speaking of that, I typically only bring 2 rods when I'm fishing the river. And once again, I've tried to bring more, but they just end up getting more in the way than anything. So I've got a rod in my hand and I've got a spare rod if it breaks, or if I need to switch a different kind of lure or whatever, I've got a spare rod right there, grab it and go. Now let's move to the very back. This is where things change quite a bit depending on how long my trip is. If it's a long trip, I'll actually probably take this off or turn it sideways or something so I can fit another cooler back here, just a small, usually it's like a backpack cooler, something to bring drinks and snacks, and that way I'm just not dying of thirst by the time I make it back to the Ram or make it down the river. I really like this Railblazer gear hub just because it's a little more compact and great for river fishing. As you can tell, I don't stuff it full of gear. I've made that mistake before, and I just don't use it all on the river. Typically, I find one lure that's working for the day and I just stick with it. Sometimes I've got to dabble and play around, so I'll have a tackle box or 2, and that's really it. It does have rod holders, so if I wanted to bring more rods, yes, I could. I typically don't because they stick straight up and they just end up getting in the way, catching on trees and stuff. However, I do use it for my net. I don't go anywhere without that fishing net. And one time on the river, I made the mistake of trying to cram it into a different rod holder. It was angled weird. I cast out, hook into a nice trout, begin to reel it in, reach for my net, and I can't get it out, and I can't get it out. Finally, I get over close to my wife, hand her the rod and reel, and then proceed to try to take it out. As soon as it breaks loose, I go flying into the water, fall into the water. Thank goodness I didn't have any kind of camera on me or my phone or anything, but I was soaking wet, and it was the start of our float, so I was wet for the rest of our float. But it was hot that day. We planned on swimming anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But I will advise, make sure that when you put your net in there, it doesn't catch on anything. And even there, it's a little stiff, but not nearly like it was that one day on my other kayak. So make sure you just practice pulling your net out and know that you can get it out quickly without falling into the water like I did. And for those of you wondering why I don't fish anywhere without my iATAK leverage landing net, you can check out this video right here on the screen where I list the pros and cons of this exact net after fishing with it for a while. I can't wait to see you there.